Okay, in this final video for the class, we're going to be focusing on climate change. And the question at hand for us to figure out is climate change a social problem? Remember, we're thinking about the kind of natural history of a social problem, how it emerges, who gets pushed into thinking, and how it gets legitimated as a particular kind of idea, and what kinds of policy alternatives then are developed around this. And this is going to be really, really critical, as we see, for thinking about climate change as a social problem. The thing that we're going to see by the end of this video is that climate change is very real. Climate change is something that most Americans see as a problem. Climate change is something that most Americans want to prioritize as a policy problem, as something that we need to develop policy around. And yet, we have very little actual real policy to address the problem of climate change. So we're going to be thinking about climate change in that particular way. So let's start with the first basic and obvious question. Well, is climate change happening? Is there something out there that we can call and point to and look at that gives us evidence that climate change is really a real phenomenon? Now, I'm asking this question slightly tongue-in-cheek because you will find almost no climate scientists who say no, climate change is not actually happening. But let's take a look at the kind of data that they use to look at this. This is tracking out what's called a temperature anomaly. It's basically showing how far above or below the average temperature of the land is in a given year. And so this is tracked all the way back to 1880, so we can really get a picture of what has been happening to the average temperature of the climate over time. And the trends are very clear. We've got here 4 different measures of this using different kinds of baselines. And what we see is very clear. Over 1880 to 2020, what we have seen is a very clear, steady, and precipitous increase in the temperature of the surface of the Earth. So there's a very real climate change that is happening. Global warming is happening. Temperatures appear to be growing, increasing over this period of time. Another way of visualizing what is essentially the same thing, we've seen more and more years where the temperature is above average, right? So, and in fact, when you look at this graph over time, what you're seeing is that the averages are really stacked here at the very end of the 20th into the 21st century. That's where we're seeing all of the above average years of temperature. So global warming is real. Climate change is in fact something that is happening. This is not news for climate scientists, and perhaps is not news for you either. Well, what does this mean? What about our perception? So one way we could imagine us not getting to address this as a social problem is, well, what if no one perceives that climate change is actually happening? Well, this is fascinating because at least since in Gallup polls or in survey data, at least since 2008, the vast majority of Americans think that global warming is in fact happening. So that by this point in time, nearly 3/4, almost 3/4 of all, somewhere between 2/3 and 3/4 of all Americans perceive that global warming is in fact happening, and fewer Americans seem to think that global warming is not happening. Moreover, more and more people believe that we need to do something about this, right? That we need to prioritize this as a policy. So there's increasing support for prioritizing climate change and dealing with global warming as a policy priority. Here you can see this has basically moved from under half in 2008, 2009, up into 64% of Americans believing we need to prioritize protecting the environment, and over half of Americans by 2020 believe we should specifically be dealing with climate change. So we live in a democracy, right? So why then, why have we done so little, and why are we doing so little to actually reduce the key source of climate change, which is carbon emissions, right? Why have we not made this an actual policy priority? And this is something that you're going to need to think about and write about in your upcoming paper. All right, thanks so much. We'll talk to you later.